Our next artist is Michelangelo, who is also one of the most recognizable artists of this time period. So, for background information, one of the first things that we want to note about Michelangelo is that he was both a painter and a sculptor. A painter and a sculptor. So, he was able to create pieces in both of those particular mediums. And he also, most frequently with his painting, used that fresco technique that we've been talking about. So many of the pieces we're going to look at are frescoes by him. Another thing we want to note about Michelangelo, which is kind of interesting, is that he and Da Vinci were both rivals of each other, that they kind of had a competition in that time, especially when it came to getting art patrons, people to sponsor their different works. So they were very competitive with each other to try and get work from different people of that time. The third thing that we want to note is something that Michelangelo is most well known for. And this is that the Pope commissioned him to paint a series of frescoes, on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. So if you're looking up at the screen, it's up at the top there, on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. So this is probably one of his greatest accomplishments, was this series of frescoes that he did to cover the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, which is within the Vatican in the building that's called St. Peter's Basilica. Now, I would also make a little note about this massive project that he completed, that it took him 4 years to complete it, 4 years, and it's 6,300 square feet, 6,300 square feet. So this is a huge accomplishment. And how he had to paint this was actually he built scaffolding like you would see at a construction site. And every day he would climb up and down this scaffolding and lay on his back to complete and paint these different images. And then he would have to climb down and look at it from the floor so that he could see these works and kind of check the scale of that time. So one of the pieces that we're going to look at, here it is from an image from the floor down, is actually the central piece that's in the center, and one of the most famous images of this piece, which is called The Creation of Adam. And so this piece is a smaller part of the Sistine Chapel piece. So I would make a note about that, smaller piece of the Sistine Chapel piece. And it is showing God reaching out and touching Adam, as in Adam and Eve, to give him life and start humanity. To give him life and start humanity. Humanity is Humanity. So if we're looking at the image here, on the right is supposed to be the image of God, and on the left is Adam. And the idea is that this is the moment where we see the beginning of human existence starting. And what's also interesting about this particular piece is that this is one of the first times we see an artist giving human characteristics to the deity of God. And so as a result, this image of God is oftentimes the image that has been used in other pieces to kind of recreate that concept and that idea. So that is something that makes this piece very unique and kind of stand apart. So a great accomplishment was this section of creation of Adam, as well as the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in total. So after Michelangelo finished the Sistine Chapel and its ceiling, he then created this altarpiece for the Sistine Chapel that's called the Last Judgment. So after this piece, I would first write altarpiece, Altar, and then piece of the Sistine Chapel. So this is what is behind the altar in that main building. And this piece is a really interesting piece because it's incredibly detailed with the figures that are in this piece. So if you look at the direct center, the image there that kind of has a yellow glow behind it is supposed to be Jesus. And it's showing Jesus as the judge of humans. Jesus as the judge of humans. And he's surrounded by 300 different figures. 300 different figures, with some rising to heaven, with some rising up to heaven, some awaiting their fate, and others sinking to hell. So in this piece, we can actually see up near the top is showing individuals that would be moving towards salvation to the heavens. And then kind of in the area surrounding Jesus would be individuals that are waiting for kind of the decision of where they will be going in the afterlife. And then below, you can see the images of those individuals that are being sent to hell or purgatory. And what's interesting is that within this particular piece, Michelangelo was kind of using a lot of imagery that was based off of the book Dante's Inferno that we mentioned before, that was very popular during this time. So kind of almost paying an homage to the characters and the storyline of what Dante thought hell would be like, and using it as a reference here in this piece. So a very detailed piece. Many of the figures, you can see there's careful attention to the human anatomy and things like that. So Michelangelo was definitely doing a lot of very careful, detailed work in this time. And that takes us to the last piece we're going to look at by Michelangelo, which is the statue of David, which is another one of the most famous images of the Renaissance. And so this piece is detailing the story of David and Goliath from the Bible. And it is showing David before his battle with Goliath. Goliath is spelled Goliath. And he is holding in his hand a sling, as in like a slingshot. And he's standing very confidently before the battle. And this particular piece was a piece that was done in marble, so probably one of the most challenging mediums to work with in this time, because you are taking a chisel and slowly, carefully removing pieces of the marble to create this piece. And this piece, what is so interesting about it is it was one of the first pieces, especially in sculpture, that was used as kind of a model for the male nude. So that would be something we can note here as well, that this is a model for the male nude in sculpture. And this piece has been recreated and is all over different places in the world that people recognize as a great piece of art. For example, in Las Vegas in Caesar's Palace, they have a recreation of this particular piece that people are, fascinated by. Now, obviously, it's not to the same scale as the actual real sculpture of David, but it is a well-known and very famous piece from this time period. So those are some pieces by Michelangelo. So now let's look at some pieces by Raphael.